Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this Thursday edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight, educating our children about racism and apartheid. That's the topic we're exploring this evening after a furore broke out over a series of incidents at a Cape Town high school. The Watchdog starts now. Let's give you a bit of a context and background to how the events unfolded and led us to this evening's discussion. What sparked it all was an incident that involved a Fish Hoek High School teacher who used racist terms during a lesson. Offended students reported the matter to school management. The teacher subsequently apologized, but students didn't accept the apology. That's when enough is enough, I should say. Protests then began at the school against not only racism, but also Islamophobia and homophobia. Forced to respond, the Western Cape Education Department then initiated a diversity training program for staff and learners. Diversity expert and social justice educator Asanda Ngwasheng was then roped in. Addressing an assembly of teachers and students at the school, Ngwasheng asserted, among other things, that, and I quote, reverse racism and farm genocide in the country do not exist. She also said, quote, black people cannot be racist, unquote. Statements that riled certain political parties, lobby groups, and some parents. Now, while white parents, I should say, then started WhatsApp groups to mobilize. The Democratic Alliance, the Freedom Front Plus, and Afri Forum were among those that slammed Ngwasheng. And in a letter to the Provincial Education Minister, the Free Speech Union South Africa told the minister, we told you not to do it. They're here to tell us why they actually wrote to the minister why they said the things they wanted to say to achieve what exactly. The minister then instructed the school and the department to stop the program. He's apparently considering legal action against Ngwasheng's firm, and in a statement, the minister has apologized to teachers and students for, quote unquote, the hurt caused. He also says that, and I quote again, I understand their concerns, frustrations, and anger. What happened at Fish Hoek High, the Western Cape Provincial Education Minister says, quote unquote, should never have happened. So many issues to explore, and to help us look at some of them, I am joined by a range of activists from across the spectrum. On the line, we have Hendrik Makaneta, an education activist from the organization Education for Social Justice Foundation. And with me in studio, I've got Sarah Gon, who heads Free Speech SA, the organization that, as I was saying earlier, repeatedly wrote to the Western Cape Education Minister. Andile Mnatama is a former MP and activist, currently the leader of Black First, Land First. Now, we had invited Afri Forum, which is deeply involved in this matter. They agreed to come on, but a short while ago dropped us. We had, because they say, Afri Forum, that is, they cannot debate with one of our guests, and that's Mr. Mnatama over here. We had also invited the Western Cape Minister of Education, David Manir. He couldn't make it, we were told, as he was attending a meeting between the Minister of Education and the country's provincial MECs, what is often referred to as the MINMEC. Asanda Ngwasheng, a regular on this show and around whom the latest on this matter revolves, couldn't come, citing numerous challenges she now faces as a direct result of the turn-off events. But hey, we're going to continue with the conversation nevertheless. Good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, sir. I mean, if I may, although we're perhaps going to start it backwards. Yeah. I mean, from the latest and then work our way all the way to where it all began. Tell us what the nub of what you said to the provincial education minister when you wrote to him repeatedly, especially as things were getting out of control.
Yeah. Essentially, we first wrote about 4 months ago, and we were expressing concern because we'd been fairly involved in being exposed to some of the initiatives that had been embarked upon in private schools, and there appeared to be, and we did have a problem with the fact that some of the approaches we thought were divisive, particularly when you're dealing with children. You know, often you're dealing with you're doing an age cohort that it doesn't necessarily have clear opinions yet, or they're very influenced by whatever they're happening at home, or it may be a range of things, but you are still dealing with children. And we saw a situation where there were a number of consultants, I'm not quite sure if that's the right term, but would take a view that essentially being whiteness is essentially it's an issue that goes through the generations. In other words, as long as you are white, you will always suffer from the proclivities towards racism, etc., etc. And we would challenge that, but obviously there are a lot of variety of opinions on that. But we don't. What we're mostly concerned about is it's very problematic to attribute to children what may or may not have been the behaviours of their predecessors, whether they're parents or grandparents or just generally in the society. And very simply, we take the view that the way to create an understanding between groupings, between races, races must learn to understand better each other. It's not to mean that they can be in each other's shoes or have each other's experience by any stretch of the imagination, but it is about letting people get a sense of what other people experience on either side and getting to be able to talk about it without feeling intimidated. And what we saw were these sense of being severely intimidated.
Just for clarity, when was the first time you wrote to the minister? What had happened?
I tell you, it wasn't. What had happened was we'd seen this in the private sector, in the private schools. And we started to get a sense that these issues were arising in the Western Cape. And we wrote to him simply to express our concerns that we were of the view that many of the processes being embarked upon could be very deleterious and weren't achieving that result of better understanding. And obviously, if people understand each other better, they're more likely to behave properly towards each other. And essentially what we were doing is just putting out our view and asking him to consider it. That's all we did. We didn't demand anything of him.
Was this before or after the Fish Hoek High School saga started?
We started to see in a couple of schools that the issue of racism was coming up, and we almost forewarning him to take into consideration our concern about the approach. And as I said, we set it out and we said, consider it, and that was pretty much it. And then about 2 weeks later, we saw that in the media that Fish Hoek was things were happening.
So it was before Fish Hoek?
It started before Fish Hoek. There was nothing. There were just senses of things in media, but nothing specific. We didn't know the details. We just knew that allegations of racism, and we knew that things could come to a head. And then 2 weeks later, something very specific, and I think it must have been the outcome of the hearing. I'm not entirely sure. To be honest, I can't quite remember. And we just said that we hadn't received a reply to our letter. We do see that things might be hotting up, and we'd just be curious how the issue is being dealt with, and left it at that. And that really was the end of it.
Andile, as I said in my intro, what actually sparked all of this was a an educator in front of a classroom uses racist language, and that hasn't been disputed, subsequently apologizes, but of course the students do not accept the approach. This then triggered the series of events I described in my introduction. Just what you make of it all in very broad strokes.
It's very infuriating, actually. It makes me very angry that a situation where black children, a black facilitator, trying to deal with acts of racism, end up being accused of being racist. You see, the civil society organizations, so-called AfriForum, the Democratic Alliance, the white political projects, including white civil society, is very clear in manipulating language to maintain the white status quo. So white children must not be told that their forefathers stole the land, that they are beneficiaries, direct beneficiaries of apartheid today. As white people, they embody power that is created by land theft, oppression of black people, exclusion, systematic racism, which was legislated by a white minority. So that truth must not be told to white children because it will offend them, it will traumatize them, and whoever speaks these truths and try to enlighten this new generation is punished. But that shows you the power of whiteness, how this country remains anti-black, and even the Constitution is interpreted in ways which takes us away from confronting racism. Black people cannot be racist. The facilitator is right. Black people are victims of racism. And white people, all of them, even the unborn ones, are beneficiaries of racism from slavery, colonialism, apartheid in South Africa. The land is still gone. We don't have it. White people have done nothing whatsoever to indicate that they want this so-called society where we can live together peacefully. When they still have our land, they're still beneficiaries of racism. Look at even the management structures. White people are overrepresented in the economy, in knowledge production, and now we can see they are protecting their children from knowing the truth because this truth upsets beneficiaries of oppression. It is a very upsetting thing that we as the black majority have to sit here and be told that we are racist. And when we try to intervene, as this facilitator has tried to do, she is the one who's accused of racism. But that shows you the power that comes with whiteness in this country, that they can turn a situation around and present themselves as victims when we try to address issues of racism and exclusion of the black majority.
Hendrik, your thoughts overall before we drill into what each one of you, would have said.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Buyo. My thoughts in this particular debate is that the recent acts of racism which continue to creep out from time to time actually tell us that our project of nation building and the project that was started by former President Nelson Mandela, to reconcile, to bring about the Rainbow Nation, but also the fundamental objective of creating a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic society. That project is not complete. Actually, it is far from over. And I think that we must accept that it is true that racism has been practiced for a number of years. And, I fully agree with those who begin to come up with a sentiment that to dismantle it completely in a period of 27 years, it might not necessarily be an easy thing. And I think that we really want to appeal to our basic education minister in particular, but along with her counterparts, the deputies and the DGs, to really come up with ways and means of ensuring that we root it out in the classroom. Our curriculum, we've always said that we need to modernize our curriculum. We met early this year in January in the basic education report where we felt that there was a need. Various stakeholders felt that there is a need to modernize our curriculum. And I think that in the process of modernizing this curriculum, we must also find a way to address all of these issues that continue to take us back as a country. We have a duty as society to help build a united and non-racial South Africa where everyone will live peacefully and in harmony without any problem. I think that the issue of racism is not different from bullying tendencies. We still continue to experience issues of bullying in the terrain of education. And I think that this should be an ongoing battle that we must continue to wage with a view to finally create a conducive environment for learning and teaching so that our children can be able to create a future for themselves.
Sarah, I mean, let's start at the beginning of this whole thing, irrespective of what your views were before or long before the Fish Hoek saga started. But I've described the events as they are sort of universally known. Teacher in front of the class makes the statements. The students don't like the statements. They are racist. Teacher apologizes, which inherent in that is an admission of guilt. Of course, this is not accepted. And other issues, so in fact, this whole episode throws out a whole lot of other issues. Homophobia, Islamophobia, and other ills, that are apparently, that people who are not white are experiencing in that school. Just your thoughts around those issues.
My thoughts are that, well, let me put it this way. I don't have the extent of facts. All I do know is that, as I understand it, the teacher was raising terms which people may consider certainly offensive, but in the context of literature which had been written at much, 100 years ago or more. And the kids took offence, and by all accounts, they did report it, and she was called to a disciplinary hearing. So a formal process was launched. I don't know what happened at the hearing, but ultimately she was not found guilty of having been racist. I assume they considered context, I'm not sure. But the pressure continued, and I assume the pressure continued because there was quite a gap between the period when this hearing was held and the need perceived for the intervention to occur. So I'm assuming something, had sort of built up, or I couldn't be entirely sure what it was. So I certainly can't speak to those facts.
But you're not suggesting that because whatever terms or language the teacher used is right or is okay because it had been used for centuries.
Context is everything, and particularly if you're talking about literature, and how you do it. That's also an issue, and I can't speak to that. I can only say that was the outcome of the hearing.
But also history, experience, feelings are just as important, because this is about how those kids who were sitting in front of the teacher construed what the teacher was saying.
Perhaps it gives me an opportunity to raise, for me, what is a crucial thing about teaching about race and issues of racism. And it's the very problem with prejudice, is that for right or wrong, people don't necessarily understand or have any cognizance, because they're not coming from the experience of the person alleging the racism, that they've said something wrong. And I'm not excusing racism. What I'm saying is that we come from very different contexts. We come from a very divided society. It's often something we have to learn and understand. Sometimes we learn the hard way, and perhaps the teacher in this instance will have learned it. And also, there are age differences. In other words, what would have perhaps gone down in my youth is very different to how things would be perceived now. So it's such a complicated range of factors that would be at play here. Her apology, whether it was well meant, again, I can't speak to. But I also know that we've seen instances where people have made apologies. They have felt sorry for what they've said, or that it hurt people. Sometimes it's been accepted, sometimes it hasn't. The person giving the apology doesn't have control over that process. And that's why the education and teaching parties from both sides, or from all sides, depending, it can be a range of, it needn't necessarily be merely black-white, it can be cultural differences, it can be a range of things. It is sensitive, they are complex, they are emotive, and they aren't always amenable to immediate understanding by those who are deemed to have perpetrated something racist they've said or acted. And that's what our main concern is, that if you do want a non-racial society, which I think is what we would strive for, and it is a constitutional imperative, it's probably one of the most difficult things to get right, is to see an adjustment to attitudes, to get people to understand better. And to be honest, I think children often don't know our history per se well enough, or don't even know
hence the intervention. But is it about understandings, misunderstandings? Is it about this being difficult to actually deal with?
No, only the beneficiaries of racism will complicate the picture. We have to take the 400 years of systematic oppression of black people, accept that South Africa is a racist country. White people occupy positions of power in this country. They have the land, they have the economy. Even now, we're speaking in the language of white people. So we must start from certain knowns. South Africa is a racist country. White people are beneficiaries of racism. And in fact, what is happening now is white people are protecting their children from even understanding how they got to the position of privilege. So a white child will grow in South Africa today, see black people live in squatter camps, then their relationship with black people is one of being helpers, being garden boys, and so on. So this becomes a naturalized situation where the white child believes that somehow, because of their whiteness, they deserve the position that they hold in society. They will not know how they arrived here. And their parents are making sure that they don't know what happened in this country to give white people such a head start in all these situations. But what I think is happening in that school and many other schools is the protection of white privileges. We are not going to deal with the issue of racism as long as we allow racists to use constitutional language to stop the process of transformation. We must be very aggressive as the black majority that every school must have an anti-racism policy. And that policy must explain what racism is, where racism comes, who benefits from racism. Up to today, white kids sitting in that class are beneficiaries of racism. And black kids sitting in that class are victims of racism. You know, we see it happening even at the universities where white children believe they have this freedom to do as they wish with black people. Because from home, church, school, They are protected from the truth of their whiteness and what it means to be white in this society means you have all the privileges which black people don't have. And it's unearned privileges. In fact, it is unethical to be white. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yes, of course, you can laugh. You laugh at genocide. You have not paid reparations for all the genocides that white people have done in America, even here. You can laugh, but you know that the Jewish people get their reparations because they are white. We have not got the reparation for colonialism, for apartheid, and it continues. Our children today are suffering because South Africa is a racist country. We as a black majority have a serious task to address this problem. But we have a situation where white people are so organized. Politically, is the DA, is the Freedom Front Plus, in the civil society, you have AfriForum, you have a new thing now called Freedom of Expression, something which all have money coming from Stellenbosch, controlling the national discourse, accepted by our media as civil society. Racist projects which are normalized to defend white interests and white racism using a constitutional language. We must disrupt this and insist on justice, starting from, it's not complicated racism. The black child, we start from the experience and how the black child received the situation. You start from the victim. It's not complicated at all. If we start from centering the experiences and feelings of the victims, that is the basis from which we start to move. It is not complicated at all. White people are racist, are beneficiaries of racism. Our schools are zones of anti-blackness, and our children are suffering as we speak. And we can no longer allow the situation to perpetuate itself.
Hendrik, you have an advantage that none of us here has. You've been privileged enough to sit together with decision makers and talk about these matters as you did when you were part of the Lekgotla. What is the government's understanding of why we are still where we are? And what is the thinking around what needs to happen and when?
Well, Vuyo, I must say, I'm listening to what Andile is saying, and to a large extent, I think that Andile is putting a blanket approach, to say that white people are racist. But in my view, Vuyo, and I'm sure you may agree with me, not all white people in our country are racist.
Which white person is not a beneficiary of racism? Which white person is not a beneficiary of racism?
Okay, of course, whites benefited from the system of racism. I agree with that. But I'm just saying, as we speak now, I want to move from the premise that begins to say not every white person in South Africa is a racist. And,
but all of them are beneficiaries of racism.
Allow me.
Okay, let's allow him to speak.
Cite examples. I can cite the example of the late Joe Slobo, who fought alongside black people in this country to make sure that the liberation of the black majority is attained. There are many others. If you look at Kalni House, you always see him with black people. But not only those two, there are many other examples. We work with whites. There are those who are really committed to building this country. There are many white people who want to see South Africa move forward. And therefore, we cannot put a blanket approach and say all of them are racist. And of course, those who are racist should be identified. I think that our guest has already indicated. It's not an easy thing to really, identify and creep out racists in society. Racism is with us. It has been with us for many years. And I think that it will continue to be with us. because it's a question of mindset. If people don't want to change, really, we don't necessarily have a dustbin for human beings where we can say we are going to place all racists in this dustbin. I mean, if people are prosecuted, just like criminals in society, not all criminals will be rehabilitated. There are those who go to jail and still come back, hardcore criminals. So, Vuyo, the issue of racism is a very difficult issue to address in a sense that even, issues of evidence. I mean, if you go to court, if you accuse somebody and say, this one is a racist, you may have to present the necessary evidence. And at this stage, I think for the past 27 years, we have not been able to concretely deal with these issues fundamentally, except, of course, those that were caught in social media, where they said something that is racist and so on. But other than that, if somebody is going to be quiet, Vuyo, and not, and just practice racism silently, I think that, we are really beating about the bush. But the fundamental issue that I want to indicate is that South Africans in general agree that we must coexist. That first and foremost, South Africa belongs to all of us who live in it, black and white. And we must continue to strive for the unity of purpose. We must continue to strive to build this united non-racial society as mandated by the Constitution. I know my friend Andile may not necessarily agree with the Constitution, but it's there. And if there are any changes that needs to be done, Andile also knows Parliament has to be constituted. We had 2/3 majority at some point, and nothing was done to change a wide range of issues that we are today crying about. I mean, the issue of land, for example. The ANC-led government at some point had a 2/3 majority. They had an opportunity to transform or to address the land question, but they did not do it. And I think that as of now, it is very clear that we are now moving towards, a coalition government, meaning that it is really going to be difficult to address the land question without the 2/3 majority in Parliament.
If you've just joined us, our topic this evening is educating our children about racism and apartheid. That's the topic we're exploring this evening after a furore broke out over a series of incidents at a Cape Town high school. Up next, we're going to look at what needs to be done. Don't go away. Welcome back. Educating our children about racism and apartheid. That's what we are talking about this evening. And my guests are all activists. Hendrik Maganeta is an education activist from the organization Education for Social Justice Foundation. And with me in studio is Sarah Gon, who heads Free Speech SA, the organization that has been writing to the Western Cape Education Minister, asking him to deal with this matter in their own way, of course. Andile Mnatama is a former MP and activist, currently the leader of Black First, Land First. Let me come back to you, Sarah. I mean, obviously, you are not going to or can't restrict yourselves to being, no, do this, don't do that. This is not nice. This is okay. You have to, at some point, say, what is your role? That's, of course, if you agree that not only must we have, or do you need conversations around racism and apartheid, in schools, but something has to be done.
One thing I'd just like to put express an opposing view to Mr. Nkradama is that I think we're very concerned about the idea that a person is judged by one facet of their being. As your guest pointed out, people's experiences are different. People's empathy levels are different. People's knowledge is different. There are people who would be horrified. Maybe they may be racist, but they'd be horrified to be described as racist because they believe they've tried not to be. So, to make the blanket categorization, I think, is very problematic. In my view, we believe the approach that should be taken is, first of all, the principals, the deputies, the senior teachers of the school are essentially the parentis in loco of the parents. In other words, while the children are under their care, they are in effect standing in for the parents. So they have really a duty of care, both in the terms of their education they provide and in terms of looking after the interests of children. I think I think their authority does need to be maintained. I think they need to be in control of managing the school. And so when allegations are raised or about racism, they must be the first to pick up and deal with it. They may need to go to the department. They will certainly need to talk obviously to the people who are making the allegation. But the point is that as we've seen tend to often happen with a situation when external consultant is brought in, very often it is the teachers and the principal, the management of the school essentially, that become powerless and don't really have a role either in imparting their knowledge or in learning themselves, so that you get that schism that is unpleasant, may not be resolved, it may remain as an unpleasant distinction. I think when you're dealing with issues of racism, I think it's very important to know one's history. If there's been a lack in that regard, and I don't know the curricula, I think it's got to be changed or it's got to be improved upon. But people do need to know, both from the good and the bad, where they come from, what's happened, etc. Because your approach to your whole life, it changes from generation to generation, but your approach to life is very much dictated to by where you came from. And it will influence you, but it mustn't dictate what you do. The idea, in fact, is to get generations to move ahead of it, and it'll be an influence, but it's not the determinant of everything they do afterwards, whatever side of the colour spectrum.
You went there, because wasn't that the point of this intervention, which then brought Ms. Mwasheng in, which incidentally you happen to have been opposed to from the start.
The intervention, nothing had happened. I mean, no intervention had happened. We were just raising the concern broadly, and because it appeared that certain schools were maybe facing something.
But when you wrote to the minister subsequently, you said, "We told you so." No,
that was a press release, and the reason we said "we told you so" is because they never responded to our letters, and that was it. You know, we don't have a moral. We believe we have a moral obligation to communicate, but we don't have a legal authority to have done anything. I mean, that's entirely within the purview of government at any level to do with. We were raising the issues. They didn't come back to us. And we, after the second letter, which was really just a brief follow-on from the first, which was 10 days later, that was it. We went quiet on it. It wasn't for us to interfere in any way. And as it so happens, by all accounts, what followed wasn't according to our advice. So, you know, yeah, that's essentially the situation. In other words, we felt to alert them to our concerns from experience, but certainly not dictate.
To the possibility of wide reaction to this intervention, because we are in this situation now because white parents have reacted to an education process to help their children to understand what's happening in society.
Interesting you say that. The reason I say that is because what we've tended to find that what happened at Fish Hoek doesn't often happen, and I'm not sure it happens at all, because within the sphere of private schools, we've tended to find that, you know, people would talk to us and try and get a sense of what's happening, white parents, obviously, because they will feel suddenly that, you know, they've been faced with the situation. But they don't tend to, they haven't in our experience tended to take the sort of instant, have the reaction that happened in this case. I think there are a range of reasons, and they can range everywhere from being concerned about prejudicing their children's opportunities. They don't want to be accused of racism. It could be a wide range of things, but they don't tend to do that. This was This was different. And I think it has a lot to do with demographics. It has a lot to do with a variety of social
But here's
issues.
something that was interesting here, that the reaction you got subsequent to Ms. Mosheng's interventions and remarks is the exact opposite of what happened when that teacher stood in front of those kids and said what they said. So the parents are suddenly mobilized or angry and frustrated on the back of what Ms. Mosheng had to say, and not on said nothing. When the very first incident that sparked it all actually happened.
Well,
and that's where it gets interesting. Hence, I was asking what people like you and organizations like yours see as their role. Is it only to say, hey, when tempers flare, but from a particular a group of people?
No, not at all. The thing is that we could only talk from second-hand knowledge of what was reported. It was purely in the press. We don't have that sort of in to know the detail. We did understand that it was a contextual thing, and people will have different views. We probably are less, find that less problematic. But the point was, she was held before inquiry, found not guilty. What happened after that, we actually didn't know. So who knew what was happening, how it was being done, who it was being communicated, in all honesty, we can't comment. But what we did understand about the intervention, perhaps I'll give you an example that just takes a bit off race, but it goes to some of the emotion. It's as I understand it, it's a fairly conservative school in the religious sense, and people do tend to be, whatever race, they tend to be very sensitive about what they perceive to be attacks on religion, on their Christianity in this case. And I think, by all accounts, that was a considerable element of what triggered, can I say, because the teachers were the other thing we do know, teachers were not allowed into the hall. It was between the department, the people who attended from the department, Mrs. Mosheng herself, and the 800-odd children that attended. Our concern is that with something like this, you can't address a large group of people. It's got to be a much more mediated, smaller environment, so that people don't feel threatened. They can ask questions.
It's one of the words that are always used whenever everyone is talking about what happened here. But I just want to take you back a little. You're saying that we should accept that the teachers in school, they're the ones who have the authority, and other people must not interfere.
No, but not quite. I'll clarify.
Okay, you can correct me where I'm wrong, but we should submit to their authority. They are there to do a job. In our absence, their authority should be accepted and respected. Then, when that incident happened, as you correctly highlighted, the school then initiated a disciplinary process which exonerated the teacher. The department then, with the authority vested in it, comes in to say, to at least make an acknowledgement, right, that certain things went wrong here. We need to be deliberate about how we deal with these things. And the starting point, the Department of Education in the Western Cape says, is let's look at a mediated intervention. And everyone accepts that. But only after they don't like what happened there. Only after parents, white parents, organized themselves in WhatsApp groups and then mobilized one another, does now the department make an about 10 on a matter that they had taken a principled position on, number one. Number two, on a matter they saw a need to actually do something about problems that had been identified. Now, white parents, in the main, take offense to what the department says. But the anger is directed at this person, whom the department contracted on the basis of what she knew, what she was capable of. This is where I get lost.
Okay.
That we accept the authority, you know, of the department, of the principals and so on, but only when we don't like what they have done.
To be honest, certainly our experience in the private sphere, and I very much doubt it was different in this regard, the parents don't usually come into the equation. They're not asked to attend. They're not even told that necessarily that it be happening.
The student governing bodies?
Sometimes, you know, it depends on the governing body. It depends on the particular environment.
School governing body.
Yeah, school governing body. But very often what happens is the first parents hear about it, and I'm talking broadly from my experience, is once the intervention has happened. And, you know, if their kids are upset, it's not a mutually agreeable thing. It's a decision that the department took to send in a group of people. I think there were about 9 odd people, including the facilitator herself, and it's not a agreement that, because as a former mediator, I know that you can only mediate successfully if it's by agreement between the parties. This wasn't a mediation. I don't think it was intended to be, but it was intended to be a communication session. Our argument was that, from what we understood of it, it was indelicate, to say the least, because she's in a very powerful position. She's very experienced. She's done this for a long time, and if children feel that they've been attacked or abused or whatever the situation may be, they are going to go to their parents, and their parents will react, rightly or wrongly, correctly, aggressively, it's the reality of what will happen, because their investment is in their children above all, above everything else to do with the school.
What is interesting, both interesting and enlightening for me, is the fact that these parents, aren't questioning, the decisions of this particular department, government department, which happens to be the Department of the Western Cape, because they are the ones who came up with this thing, who said this should be the intervention. Now, the anger is not directed, the abuse is not directed at them. It's directed at the person who, was responsible for this mediation effort. Why aren't parents saying, you made the wrong choice of a person who should have stood in front of our children? Why aren't they saying,
do we know that
your processes?
Yeah, do we know? I mean, what I'm saying is I actually don't know the extent of what the response was. But, what essentially did, whatever choice the department made, they made the investment in the person themselves based on their understanding of her experience and her knowledge and her reputation. And I just think it was badly. I think it was done without enough pre-planning. That's my assumption, because
then why isn't the finger pointing at the department?
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's very likely to be doing so.
Asana Masheng is now, the one being vilified, threatened.
Well, is she being
harassed?
I can't answer to that. But let's put it this way. So that the point was made earlier that South Africa is a fractured society, and I think one of the problems is that people will, rightly or wrongly, and I think this, from what I understand, there's justification in the reaction, is that as a professional this was not handled well, and they reacted to it. I think the department has come under criticism from its own party, the governing party. I mean, it's not solely been it's not as if it's been a uniform response one way or the other. There's been quite a lot of reaction to it. I don't know what the parents have done.
Your conversation with her demonstrate white power. She's been talking all the time, entertaining her. I mean, it again shows how allocation of resources, including speaking time, is based on the race project. Now,
no, let me tell you why. I had to do this, because very seldom actually get insights into what the thinking is and why, for instance, she runs the organization.
It is a racist project. It is a very racist project.
And I thought, that was very important. It's not every day that you get that.
But just like our brother there, the big problem in South Africa is we don't understand what racism is. It's a shocking thing, given the fact that we have 400 years of systematic racism. The brother talks about individuals, individual acts of goodness. The problem here is racism is an institutional project, institutional power. It makes very little difference what individual white people do. All of them, because it's a racist society, are beneficiaries of racism. And they have so much power that a person, as you now say, who is asked to facilitate, end up being victimized by the power of whiteness. And whiteness can therefore put an innocent person in a position of being seen as the guilty party. And we're no longer talking about the racism at the school. We're talking about Asanda, the person who came to deal with the racist project in that school. For me, this is a big teachable point.
Which is the point I'm making.
Exactly. The teachable point is simply to show the power of whiteness and how organized white people are in different institutions. Now they're using the language of freedom of expression to perpetuate racism, to defend white privileges. And we as a black majority here are also lost, like my brother there. He doesn't know the difference between institutional racism and individual acts of racism. And then this global thing about South Africa belongs to all who live in it. How can that be so? When white people still have the land they stole from us, white people have done nothing. You know, like, it will be nice if white people voluntarily were saying, we are beneficiaries of racism and colonialism and apartheid, and this is what we are doing to make sure that there's reparations. None of that is happening. In fact, there's clamping down from the white people that every time we try to make moves for transformation, that now is being seen as racist. We must learn from this situation the power of whiteness, how it's able to project itself as victims when it's actually the perpetrator.
Which is why I was asking Sarah what she sees to be her role and the role of the organization that she leads in dealing with these problems. Last word from you, Hendrik. We have run out of time.
The reality is that we have got a beautiful country, South Africa. And of course, despite what transpired in the past, we have got the future to build. And one of the cornerstones that we have currently, the supreme law of the country, is our Constitution of the Republic, which was adopted in 1996. And until such a time that that Constitution is changed, we will continue to abide with it. We have got the duty, every South African, we are all under this Constitution, including Andile. We are all governed by this supreme law of the country, whatever we do. And of course, where there are issues of racism, where they creep out, they need to be addressed. And people need to be charged, to account for this diabolic acts of racism. I fully understand institutional racism. I know that it is embedded in every institution. That's how we have inherited it. But the key question is, what do we do going forward? But going forward is that white people are here to stay. They are here with us. There will never come a time where we'll say they are no longer part of South Africa. That's why I'm saying South Africa belongs to all of us, black and white. Because we're all here to stay. We share this beautiful land together. We might as well start, cooperating with one another. But of course, the law is there to guide. There will obviously there will be fights. It can happen, that in a country with more than 50 million people, there won't be any fights. There will be quarrels here and there. But the law is available to address these issues.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Let me thank all of you, reflections from activists from across the spectrum on how we can educate our children about racism and apartheid. You haven't had the end of this conversation. We'll bring you more from other vantage points. But for tonight, that's where we are going to leave it. Thank you for watching. To join us again tomorrow evening, same time.